Bill Ramsey's early memories were not the kind you wrap in soft colors or warm nostalgia. His childhood unfolded under the gray skies of suburban London, among crumbling fences and overgrown hedges, where something unseen seemed to lurk just out of reach. He was only 5 or 6 when it began. Strange drawings, strange dreams. Kneeling on the dirt with his knees muddy, he would scratch out odd sketches, circles like staring eyes, jagged lines like claws. Adults laughed at his strange little pictures, but at night, Bill felt the eyes on the page blink open. One cold winter evening, his mother was in the kitchen when she noticed Bill standing rigid by the back door. The boy's eyes were different, pale irises ringed in black, fixed on something beyond the glass. "Someone's outside," he whispered. She opened the door to a yard empty except for the shifting mist and the faint growl of a distant dog. Bill's sleep changed after that. He woke drenched in sweat from long, heavy dreams, walking a deserted street under no moon, hearing footsteps behind him that didn't belong to him, and a hot, animal breath on his neck. In the dreams, his feet thinned, his nails grew long, and a raw sound clawed its way up his throat. Not a boy's voice, not even an animal's growl, but something between the two. In the morning, his throat would ache as if he'd been screaming. His mother thought he had a cold. The first real sign of something darker came when a neighbor caught sight of him late at night, sitting in the small shed at the back of the garden, murmuring in a low, guttural tone. In the morning, strange marks were found scratched into the earth. Not quite human finger marks, not quite animal tracks. Bill only said, "I saw something in the glass. It was calling me." At school, the oddness followed him. One afternoon during a football game, Bill suddenly froze, dropped to his knees, and began to emit a sound that turned the other boys' faces white, a harsh, grinding growl, like stone on metal. When his friends reached out, he jerked away, his eyes wild, his fingers clawing into the ground as if trying to dig himself out of his own skin. Doctors told his parents it was hyperactivity, night terrors, stress. But at night, when the lights went out, a thin, cold draft rose from the back of his neck, and he'd crouch in the corner, muttering not his own name but strange syllables, drawing clawed symbols on the floor with trembling fingers. An old handyman in the neighborhood, who liked telling local legends, warned Bill's father, "There are shadows here that only attach themselves to certain souls." But what attached itself to Bill was no legend, it was real, and it was growing. The family began to notice changes. His eyes sometimes flicked toward empty doorways. He would mutter, "They're in the corridor, they're coming." On stormy nights, he would run into the garden barefoot, leaving prints in the wet soil, prints that looked neither human nor animal, but an unholy blend of both. By the time he returned, his shoulders hunched, his lips curled in a tight smile, and a strange flicker lived behind his eyes. People who'd once known the boy began whispering about him. They crossed the street when he walked by. Bill could hear their whispers, but he could no longer answer them. His throat was full of that alien growl now, something alive crouched inside him. Childhood was slipping away, but not naturally. It was being pushed out, eaten from within. The innocent boy was being hollowed out by a dark presence that, for now, only stirred in his dreams and in lonely corners of the night. And somewhere, something was waiting, turning the lock on a door Bill did not even know was there. By the late 1970s, Bill Ramsey was no longer a child. He was a weary, quiet man in his 20s, living a life that looked ordinary on the surface. A job, a small flat, a girlfriend. But the thing inside him had never really gone away. It had grown, waiting, coiling like a snake in the dark. It began with flashes, sudden waves of rage that had no trigger, like a fever. He would grip the edge of a table until his knuckles went white, nails biting into the wood. Sometimes he felt his heart racing, as if it were someone else's heartbeat. His vision narrowed, his jaw ached, his teeth felt too large for his mouth, and always there was that smell, hot, metallic, animal that no one else could detect. One summer evening at a local pub in Southend, the first full eruption came. Friends were drinking and laughing, the jukebox playing a scratchy rock song. Bill sat among them, pale, sweating, gripping his pint glass too hard. Without warning, he rose, overturned the table, and lunged at a man nearby. Witnesses swore his face had changed not literally into a wolf, but twisted, jaws clenched, eyes wild, saliva at the corners of his mouth. It took several men to pull him off, and even then, he fought like an animal, growling and snapping. When it was over, he slumped down as if waking from a dream, confused, muttering apologies he barely understood. From then on, the episodes grew worse. He would black out and awaken miles away, his clothes torn, his hands filthy. Police reports described him as extremely strong, resistant, exhibiting animalistic behavior. One officer said he heard a low growl coming from Bill's chest as they tried to restrain him, a sound no human throat should make. Another swore Bill had tried to bite him. At home, the transformation was even stranger. He would wake at night drenched in sweat, crouched at the foot of his bed like a predator, his nails digging into the mattress, teeth bared at shadows only he could see. Sometimes he ran to the mirror, staring at his own reflection, breathing heavily, certain he'd see something other than himself staring back. Word spread. Newspapers picked up the story, "Man attacks like a wolf." Talk of werewolves and possession started to bubble in pubs and cafes. Bill hated the attention, but feared himself more than the headlines. He visited doctors, psychiatrists, anyone who might help. They prescribed pills, therapy, explanations, but none of it worked. The thing inside him was beyond science, beyond reason. The breaking point came one night in 1983. Bill was driving when another episode overtook him. He abandoned the car and staggered down the street, hands clawing at his head, teeth bared in a silent scream. By the time police arrived, he was tearing at a fence, growling like a cornered beast. Several officers tried to subdue him. It took a dozen men in handcuffs to bring him down. Even then, one officer later said, "It wasn't like arresting a man. It was like catching something that wanted to kill you." This time, Bill wasn't let off with a warning. His case began to attract not just headlines, but people who dealt with the strange and the supernatural. And thousands of miles away, in Connecticut, two investigators of the paranormal were taking notice. Ed and Lorraine Warren had read of exorcisms, demons, and hauntings all their lives, but never of a man who might truly be possessed by the spirit of a beast. They booked a flight to England. By the time Ed and Lorraine Warren landed in London in late 1983, the tabloids had already branded Bill Ramsey, the Southend Werewolf. Headlines screamed about a man who attacked police with animal strength and bit through metal cuffs. But behind the sensationalism, the Warrens sensed something real, something darker than folklore. Bill sat in a hospital ward under constant observation. His wrists were raw from restraints, and his eyes, when open, had that same hollow, predatory focus that had terrified officers. Most of the time he seemed calm, polite, even an exhausted man desperate to understand what was happening to him. But the nurses whispered. At night, his breathing changed, low and guttural, like an animal stalking prey in its sleep. The Warrens met him on a gray afternoon. Rain lashed the hospital windows. Ed, a stocky man with a firm handshake, approached first. "Mr. Ramsey," he said, voice steady, "my wife and I have been studying cases like yours for decades." Lorraine, slight and pale, stood back a little, her hands folded. Her clairvoyant sense was already stirring. She could feel something curling around Bill like smoke, a thing that was not his own. Bill glanced up, his fingers twitching against the restraints. "I'm not mad," he whispered. "I don't drink. I don't use drugs. But sometimes, I'm not me. I'm something else." His voice cracked. "I can feel it watching from inside my skin." Lorraine's breath caught. Later, she would say the aura around him was unlike anything she'd felt, not a ghost, not a demon, but something primal, old, animal. "It's not human," she murmured to Ed when Bill looked away. "It's something that wants to wear him like a mask." Over the next few days, the Warrens observed him. Doctors tried tranquilizers, restraints, therapy sessions. Nothing stopped the violent surges when they came. Twice Bill's pulse spiked and he erupted, eyes wide, snarling and lunging against the bed straps with a strength that startled even Ed. It was as if some invisible predator was fighting to break through the human frame. The Warrens began to suspect possession, but not of a conventional kind. "This isn't a spirit of a dead person," Ed told the attending physician. "This is a living force, maybe demonic, that's manifesting as a beast." The doctor scoffed, but the evidence mounted. They knew England would never allow an exorcism in a state hospital. The Warrens had a priest in mind, Father Robert McKenna, an experienced exorcist in Connecticut. Quietly, they began making arrangements to bring Bill to the United States. It was risky, expensive, and legally complicated, but Ed was convinced, if we don't act now, someone's going to die. Bill himself hesitated. He didn't believe in demons, but each time, he felt the low growl vibrate in his chest. Each time, his hands curled into claws without his willing them. He grew more afraid. He agreed to go. "Whatever you have to do," he told the Warrens, "just get it out." On a damp December night, a small team of medical staff and the Warrens escorted Bill Ramsey onto a plane bound for Connecticut. He sat by the window, staring at the black Atlantic below, his reflection flickering faintly in the glass. For a second, it didn't look entirely like him. The flight to Connecticut was tense. Bill sat pressed against the windows, fixed on the endless black of the Atlantic. Occasionally, his fingers twitched on the armrest as though tracing invisible patterns. Lorraine sat diagonally across from him, praying softly under her breath. Ed stayed alert, a heavy rosary coiled in his palm like a weapon. Somewhere over the ocean, turbulence shook the plane. Bill's head jerked up. A low rumble rose from his throat, not words. Not even a growl this time, but a vibration that made Lorraine's skin crawl. The flight attendants froze in the aisle. For a moment, it seemed the beast inside him might erupt right there at 30,000 feet. Ed touched Bill's shoulder and said firmly, "Stay with me, Bill. You're stronger than it." Bill's breathing slowed, but sweat poured down his temples. They landed just before dawn. Father Robert McKenna, a Dominican priest who had performed exorcisms for the Warrens before, met them at the small airport. He was an older man with tired but unwavering eyes. "This one feels different," he murmured after shaking Ed's hand. "Something older than anything I've met." They drove Bill to a quiet church in the Connecticut countryside, far from towns or curious onlookers. The building was cold and dim inside, its stone walls lined with statues of saints. Outside, the winter wind hissed through bare trees like whispering voices. Bill sat in a small room behind the altar, restrained only by a simple wooden chair. He looked exhausted, hollow. "I don't want to hurt anyone," he whispered, "but it keeps pushing." His hands trembled, knuckles whitening. Lorraine stood at the door, sensing the air thickening around him, a pressure that made her temples throb. Father McKenna set up the ritual space carefully. A crucifix stood on the table before Bill. Holy water glimmered in a silver font. Candles flickered, though no breeze moved. Ed placed a recorder on the floor to document everything. "If anything happens," he told Bill, "do not fight me. Let Father speak. We'll keep you safe." Bill nodded weakly. "If it kills me," he muttered, "let it die with me." The church felt smaller as dusk fell. Shadows lengthened like reaching fingers. Lorraine could feel something gathering, coiling inside Bill, preparing. It was not just a presence, it was a hunger. As the priest donned his stole and opened his worn Latin text, Bill's breathing changed slow, deep, almost animal. His head dipped low, hair falling over his eyes. The first drops of holy water hissed on his skin as though striking a hot surface. Father McKenna began to speak in Latin. "Exorcizo te, omnes spiritus immunt." The words rolled through the chapel like thunder. Bill jerked once, then twice. His chair creaked. A low, guttural snarl rippled up from his chest, vibrating the wood beneath him. Lorraine felt the temperature drop. Ed gripped his rosary tighter. They were standing at the edge now, the threshold between man and monster, between soul and whatever wanted to devour it. The church was silent, except for Father McKenna's Latin prayer echoing off the stone walls. Bill sat in the chair trembling, his head bowed, sweat dripping from his hair onto the floor. Each word of the exorcism seemed to strike him like a hammer blow. Suddenly, he snapped upright, the chair legs screeching across the floor. His eyes were no longer his own, wide, feral, glinting with a predatory light. His lips peeled back from his teeth in a grotesque snarl. "He's mine," The voice bellowed, but it wasn't Bill's voice. It was deeper, ancient, rumbling, vibrating through the chapel like the roar of some caged beast. The restraints creaked. His hands clawed at the air, fingers curling like talons. Candles flickered violently, though no wind stirred. Father McKenna raised the crucifix high. "In the name of Jesus Christ," he commanded, his voice unshaking. "Leave this man." Bill's body convulsed, his head thrown back. A sound burst from his throat, part scream, part growl, part something too low and guttural to name. His feet kicked the floor, his back arched. Lorraine pressed her hands to her ears. The air itself seemed to shudder. Ed stepped closer, ready to restrain him if necessary. Father McKenna continued, his Latin stronger now. "Exorcism, spiritus immunt." The beast howled through Bill. "He belongs to me. He is mine." But the priest did not falter. He sprinkled holy water over Bill's face. It hissed, steaming as if poured on iron. Bill jerked violently, then fell back, gasping. His claws unclenched. For a moment, the chapel was filled with the stench of wet fur and blood, and then it was gone, like smoke blown out by a sudden wind. Bill sagged in the chair, trembling. His eyes blinked open, clear and human for the first time in years. Tears ran down his cheeks. "It's gone," he whispered, voice hoarse. "Oh God, it's gone." Father McKenna lowered the crucifix slowly, sweat running down his own temples. The candles burned steady again. The icy pressure that had filled the church dissipated like mist in sunlight. Lorraine felt it too. The aura around Bill was empty now, hollow but clean. She stepped forward and laid a hand on his shoulder. "You're free," she said softly. "It can't hurt you anymore." Bill collapsed into sobs, his body shuddering like a man waking from a nightmare. Ed placed a blanket over him. Outside the chapel, the winter wind had gone still. In the months that followed, Bill returned to England. The violent episodes ceased. The newspapers lost interest. But for the Warrens, the case remained unforgettable, not just because it proved once again the reality of possession, but because for the first time, they'd stared into something not entirely human, not entirely spirit, a predator that wore a man's body like a mask. Years later, Lorraine would still shudder at the memory. "It wasn't a ghost," she told a reporter. "It wasn't a demon the way we normally think of them. It was something older, something feral. And when it left behind only a man. Tired, broken, but free." The Southend Werewolf was gone, but the echo of its growl lingered in their minds, a reminder of the thin, fragile line between man and beast, and of what might be waiting in the dark beyond it. Did you enjoy the story? Let us know in the comments. And if you liked it, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to The Horror Dream. Want more stories like this? Subscribe to The Horror Dream, and we'll bring you more darkness, just for you. If you enjoy a little chill down your spine, stick around, like, share, and hit that subscribe button, right here on The Horror Dream. Your support keeps us going, so stay with us. Subscribe to The Horror Dream for more spine-tingling tales.